Hello, BookTube, and welcome back to another episode of my 2022 library tour. It's taken a slight detour because the Bean and I decamped to snowy Vermont, and I don't have access to my bookshelves. But I have access to the bookshelves of memory, the bookshelves of libraries past, and I thought I'd go through a lot of those while I'm up here, just because it is still part of a visual record. I'm once again wrestling with the light in this place in the hopes that if I hold the iPad at an angle, you can see the books I'm talking about. So we're just gonna start, and we're starting with something steamy. We're starting with a book by Karen Kelly called "Earth Guys Are Easy," and I think we can all agree that's true. And those of you who might be wondering, this is in fact a Paul Marin cover. You just can't see the goods, that's all. But this is exactly what you would think from the title. It's not exactly Schopenhauer. Then we have Penguin Mass Market Paperback. I scanned this when I had it. It's in two volumes. Absolutely terrific stuff. This is the second volume. Unfortunately, I don't have either one of these. These were Canadian Penguin Mass Market paperbacks. I don't have them anymore. I never see them anymore. This is the great historian P.R. Burton, and this is the second part of his two-volume work on the War of 1812. So this is Flames Across the Border, the tensions between the United States and Canada. There's scarcely 5 minutes of this book that doesn't take place on ground where I am right now. and that would make it interesting anyway, but those of you who are maybe those of you who are Canadian who might have grown up with this author and maybe had to read him in school, I think he's terrific. Just a fantastic reading experience. The first book is called The Invasion of Canada. The second book is called Flames Across the Border. And they are as vivid as historical writing gets. Don't know why I don't have them. Really wish I did. Okay, this next one is by Donald Heinzelman, and it's fairly straightforward. It won't take much. It won't take much more time than Earth Guys Are Easy. This is a guide to owl watching in North America. If I remember correctly, this was just a cute little mass market paperback that you're supposed to stick in your pocket when you go out owl watching. I was an avid owl watcher for a long time here in the greater Boston area. The greater Boston area has a number of old ornate cemeteries and arboretums and parks and whatnot, but especially old ornate cemeteries. Owls love them because there's ample prey and no confusion. Owls don't like fuss. They don't like ambient noise. They don't like anything like that. And in a big, sprawling graveyard, an old graveyard that has rolling hills and dales and whatnot, and very little foot traffic, they get that in abundance. So it's the perfect place to go watching for them, and I have on many, many occasions. This book gives you all the details about habitat. There's a lot in here about pellets. Owls leave behind pellets that are, once you get past the slightly gross aspect of their origin story, they are utterly fascinating. An owl will just pop down anything into its mouth, and anything that can't be digested comes out in that pellet. So you will sometimes get whole pelts. You will get bones. Always you will get bones. Owl pellets are fascinating to study. Absolutely fascinating. And you'll also get their behaviors. There are a whole bunch of things about owls that make them a challenge to go watching. Of course, the one that you would expect is the times when they're usually most active are the times when they're hardest to see. That is no coincidence. But also, unlike almost any other bird that I have watched, except for corvids, crows and ravens, just don't care. But aside from almost any other bird that I've gone watching, owls are smart. They are as smart as humans. They're not quite as smart as corvids, as crows and ravens, but crows and ravens don't care whether you're looking at them or not. They think you're a jerk. But owls can anticipate. They can think as good as you can, and they can anticipate. So in addition to the usual obstacles of bird watching of any kind, timing, terrain, long hours of patience, there's also the fact that in this instance, as in almost no other instance, the bird knows what you're doing and knows about you long before you know about it and wants to maybe thwart you. I've had that happen many, many times where I know that the owl is near. But but anyway, I don't have this book anymore. I don't have any books on any practical guides to bird watching because I don't need them anymore. I would never in a million years would I go to Mount Auburn Cemetery and stand in the snow all night long just in hopes of catching a glimpse of a great horned owl. Once upon a time, I would do that, but not anymore. No. Then this next one is by Amy Hatkoff, and this is The Inner World of Farm Animals. And the subtitle is Their Amazing Social, Emotional, and Intellectual Capacities. And there we have some babies who know they're being filmed. They know what's going on. They know it's not just someone standing there. They know there's something in between the person and them. They don't know what photography is, but they know that something odd is going on, and they're curious about it. And this book, the inner lives of farm animals are not a mystery. They haven't been a mystery for 7,000 years. Farmers have been commenting on those inner lives for 7,000 years. They are not a mystery. They exist. In other words, those inner lives exist, and they are extremely multidimensional, extremely textured and rich. Any of you who have ever spent time with a farm animal, when they get a chance to calm down, if they're in a pen, if they can hear members of their own kind being killed just a short distance away, they're not going to be themselves any more than you would be in that situation. But if any of you have ever spent time with a farm animal when they are calm, when they get to be themselves, will realize that they do indeed have inner lives. It is not crunchy granola new age type speak to say that. They have rich inner lives. Some of them are jerks, but that's true of all species. I have spent an enormous amount of time with pigs, who are America's #1 farmyard animal aside from chickens. I have spent enormous amounts of time with pigs, and I know for sure that they are people. And this book didn't tell me anything that I didn't already know. I think it was aimed mainly at the people who don't believe this, at the people who think that farmyard animals are wind-up toys, who don't feel any emotions, don't feel any pain, and exist only to be factory farmed for the convenience of human beings. If any of those people read that book, it may have changed their mind. I don't know. I don't have a copy. It was richly illustrated. I wish I still did. Then we have a children's book. This is by Daniel Sanssouci. Mine was signed on the cover. These are all books that I had at one time and used a flatbed scanner to scan. And I don't have this anymore, and I didn't notice at first that the original owner signed the front cover. What an obnoxious thing to do. This is North Country Night by Daniel Sanssouci. And it is a lovely illustrated children's book about what the animals in a northern wood do when it's a snowy night, when it's a cold and snowy night. We had a little dusting of snow here just last night. This book would have been duplicated 5 miles in any direction from where the Bean and I were reading in bed, where you've got the deer and the marten and the mink and the foxes and the various birds, including owls, maybe a bear, that are just going about their lives while it snows in the North Country, where you've got large amounts of land that no one lives on, large amounts of space between major and dangerous roads, and those major roads are largely abandoned at night. This is lovely. It's one of those kids' picture books that you would just revisit with them over and over again. And when I read it the first time, I read it when it first came out. I don't have a date on that, but it was a while ago. And I remembered when I was reading it that there are huge parts of the world where this would be a complete fantasy, where if you gave this book as a kid to a kid in huge parts of the world, they would never have heard of these animals, and they would never have had a night like this. And they happen all the time here. I think this area of Vermont is scheduled to get a much bigger snowstorm in just a few days. So we'll have another North Country night. Okay, then we have another work of classical history. I guess we're going to get those in every one of these libraries of the lost. This is by Jo Marie Classen, and I remember it being very good. It's Ovid Revisited, the Poet in Exile. There's a very somber statue of a man who was not somber until his exile happened, until he, as he put it, saw something and said something in the court of the Roman Emperor Augustus, who banished him from Rome, banished him to the far reaches of the world, the far reaches of Roman society. He didn't banish him quite beyond that reach, and there was a point to that. That was the point. You're far, far away from your creature comforts, but you're not out of our reach. He was banished there and stayed there for the rest of his life. Miserable, most of the time we can assume, certainly he said that he was, and he wrote great poetry from exile. And it circulated back in Rome, and there was lots of pressure put on Augustus. Augustus was a dictator, but he was an approachable dictator. There was lots of pressure put on him. By this point, Ovid was the foremost poet in the entire Roman world. Imagine if John F. Kennedy had sent Robert Frost to the southern tip of South America and said, "Don't come back." He'd get pressured. Augustus got pressured to bring Ovid back, and he never did. And whatever it was that Ovid said and saw, I mean, the original speculation was that Ovid had written some rather knowingly cynical, worldly body poetry, and that was very much not against the tone of Augustus's own private life, but it was against the sort of creepy, saccharine, moralistic tone that he was trying to set for his new Rome. And there was speculation that poem, it was immensely popular, everybody loved it, everybody was quoting from it, but there was speculation that was the reason why Ovid was banished. But I don't believe that, because Augustus's successor, Tiberius, didn't care about that sort of thing at all. And he was immediately approached. As soon as he took the purple, he was immediately approached to bring Ovid back from exile, and he didn't do it. So whatever it was, had to have involved Tiberius personally. And Ovid died in exile. And this is a wonderful, wonderful examination of that part of Ovid's life. There's not much that we have to go on, but this author does a lot with what little we do. Again, wish that I still had it. Okay, all right. Next we have one of my reviewing brethren. This is Dwight Garner, the famous, great Dwight Garner. This is a book that he did called Read Me, and it's a century of classic book advertisements, where he just went through and analyzed what shape those advertisements took, what books were being hyped, most of them long forgotten, and where these advertisements were. How do you get the word out about books? A perennial question that is still true today for publishers. How do you actually reach the vein of active readers with money in their pockets that you hope is out there for every book? How do you reach them? You hope that they're out there. How do you find them? Dwight Garner has a dual connection here, since I'm doing this video in Vermont, since he worked on a Vermont newspaper, I think in Burlington, for a while. And he also worked on a Boston paper, the old Boston Phoenix. Once upon a time, Boston was a 3-paper city. The Boston Globe was our New York Times. Boston Herald was our New York Post. And then we had an alternate, a kind of rougher indie alternate called the Boston Phoenix. That was a great paper. Somebody ought to write a 600-page history of the Boston Phoenix. Somebody ought to do that. The records are all available, unlike, for instance, all of the great Boston newspapers that preceded those three, where the records have long since frayed to the winds. Somebody could write a story about the Boston Phoenix, and they really should. A lot of great writers came through there. They broke a lot of big stories, including one enormous story that bigger newspapers later took credit for. And he was connected with them as well. So they've got the Boston, Vermont connection. And those of you who are interested in the bookish world, not so much how books move you to tears and activate your lymph nodes and whatnot and get you in the feels, but rather books as things, which I am. I'm very much interested in books as things, as well as their content. If you're interested in that, this is a book to find and read. I don't have a copy of it. I wish I did. I had the advanced copy from the publisher, and I had the finished copy, and I got rid of both of them. Oh boy! All right. Well, this was in rough shape. It was in rough shape when I scanned it, and it's gone now, so I don't even have it in any shape. This is Shallow Waters by William Sargent, another Cape Cod book. Those of you who have been watching this channel will know Cape Cod is a wonderful, enchanted place that sticks out from the coast of Massachusetts into the ocean, hooks around a little. And this is an area called Pleasure Bay. Every little area of the Cape ought to have a book like this. This was a slightly oversized paperback with tons of high-definition black and white photos, and the author just ruminating on his history with Pleasure Bay and also with the nature, the natural world of Pleasure Bay. A wonderful Cape Cod book to have. I have a whole bunch of Cape Cod books, but I didn't manage to hold on to this one. Maybe the shape that this was in when I scanned it, I don't remember, but maybe that was the reason why. Maybe it just kept deteriorating So I eventually had to take it behind the barn and put it out of its misery. Okay, then we have an older member, a colleague of my profession, of a writer about books. This is J. Donald Adams, and this is Speaking of Books and Life. He wrote a book column for the New York Times forever and ever that was really popular. People really liked it. They got to know his voice. I had this, I think the book I scanned here was a mass market paperback, long since gone. I think it was really cheaply made, so it may have fallen apart because I went back to it a lot. And if I went back to it a lot, 12 years ago when I scanned this, I can only imagine how much I'd go back to it now, because I am once again a book columnist for a print newspaper. Not the New York Times, but instead the Bedford Times Press in Bedford, Iowa, where I write a weekly book column. And I had done that. I had done weekly book columns before, decades before. And I'm slowly getting back all of the habits that allow you to do that, all of the instincts. They blur a little with time, especially if you're only doing book reviews. A book review is a very different thing from a book column. A column is a voice. A column is a person. Your writing voice has to appear in your book reviews if they're going to be any kind of success. But an editor can take it out too. He can take those parts out. Whereas the book column is your voice. It would be totally pointless to remove that from a book column. There'd be nothing left. A book column is more your literary adventures than it is book reviews. In fact, every once in a while, J. Donald Adams would turn his column over to just reviewing one particular book. And I remember it always felt like a disappointment when he did that, even though I love book reviews. It always felt disappointing because I wanted to hear stories, rambles, thoughts, ponderings, that sort of thing. And I'm having to get back into the habit of doing that myself. I write my columns on the weekend, and it's the key is I've been boring the poor Richardson family with stories about this. The key I'm remembering is to heighten your instincts to realize that almost anything you see could be a column. You have to start looking for that. You can't expect the world to drop column ideas in your lap. Instead, you have to go looking. Okay, well, that was interesting. Is that a column? Is that enough for a column? Or this bookish thing was interesting that I didn't expect to see. I was just paying attention and noticed it. I will get back in the habit of doing that. And I had totally forgotten how much fun it is, and the more fun I have, the better those columns will get. So I wish, this is just a collection of his columns. I wish I had it. Then next one is the UK Penguin Mass Market. This was a UK Penguin Mass Market of The Black Prince by the novelist and philosopher Iris Murdoch, who I've never got on with. But unlike a lot of authors in the mid-20th century, it's not that I haven't got on with her because I took her measure and I found her wanting. It's not that at all. I think this is probably a serious author, and probably a seriously entertaining one too. And that this is one of that group of authors where I feel like there's no sin on their part. The sin is on my part. I have not figured out a way in. And when that happens, suddenly they will open up to me. I feel certain that is true. For her novels, of course, not for her philosophy. This is a novel, as you can tell from the cover, this is a novel about a washed-up novelist. So it's probably the thing that I would most likely be my entry point to her. But I have almost no Iris Murdoch in ebook. I keep hoping for my ebook boys to send me all of her novels with these UK Penguin mass market paperback illustrations. I don't see the artist's name and I don't have the book, but there was a whole run of these things that had this particular artist. Very good covers. But maybe it's just beyond them. Forgive me, Mr. Spock. I sometimes expect too much of you. Sooner or later, I will find a way in to this author's work. I'm not closing the door at all. This is not an author where periodically I will pick an author that I need to revisit because I didn't like them the first time. It's never a case that I haven't liked Iris Murdoch. I just haven't loved her in the way that I feel like I probably should. Okay, this next one is frontier fiction, a fantastic melodramatic cover. This is Dale Van Every. And this is the Scarlet Feather. Look at that. He's calling over his shoulder to tell his bonneted wife to run inside. You can see arrows are striking the ground. He's got his flintlock but she still has to get to shelter in their log cabin. That's what this is. This is frontier fiction. Really good frontier fiction with a sharp insight into the characters. The characters aren't just these boring broadcloth things that you get in a lot of fiction like this. Of course, you don't get fiction like this anymore, but once upon a time you did. It was in bucket loads, right? Drums Along the Mohawk and all of that. And often in those books, the characters are just cardboard cutouts. But Dale Van Avery was a really, really talented writer. And that was true in his fiction and his nonfiction. He wrote a bunch of nonfiction that I'm sure will show up on the Library Tour of the Lost. He wrote a bunch of nonfiction on the same stuff, on the American frontier experience in the Northeast and a little bit in the West, approaching the Mississippi River. And he also wrote one of the greatest books excoriating the U.S. government for its mistreatment of Native Americans that I have ever read. It's called Disinherited, and it ought to have a place on that great works shelf with Custer Died for Your Sins or Bury My Heart at Wounded Knee. It ought to have a place there. I have a feeling, well, it had a small print run when it first came out, Disinherited did, all about how the United States broke every treaty that it ever made with what were sovereign nations, simply because they had the power to do it. And Disinherited had, I think, a smaller print run, and in Paperback certainly it had a smaller publisher, and the paperbacks that I've had of it are very cheap. And that might have been the reason why it didn't make it into that pantheon to start with. And then now, of course, I know why it wouldn't make that pantheon, because we live, the 21st century is intensely racist and intensely segregationalist. So you could write the greatest book in the world on the American government's mistreatment of the Native American nations whom it dispossessed, and if your skin is white, it won't make a difference. It could be the greatest thing that's ever been written. You would be excluded from that pantheon, and on explicitly racist grounds. And all of the virtue signalers who did that excluding would say it proudly. They would just say it openly on social media or in public. They would just say, oh, yeah, we don't want any white writers. I've learned to the best that I can. I'm 100% Irish and South Boston Irish, so I don't really do well at making my peace with things, but I've tried to make as much of my peace with that fact as possible. That the 21st century is just a dark, benighted era that honors censorship, that exalts mobbing, and that it has totally, so to speak, to use the Twitter phrase, normalized savagely rigorous racist and segregationist thinking. It even applies on BookTube. It's become such a fad that it even applies to the best people in the world, who are the people in this little corner of BookTube. Some of whom will say openly, men suck, or hey, I don't read books by white people, or whatever. Two wrongs don't make a right. If you make a baldly, blatantly, monstrously bigoted statement, it's true no matter what group you're being bigoted against. But I've learned at least a little to make my peace with it, and that is probably the reason why Dale Van Avery's Disinherited will never make that list. But if you want to read about that story, and you should, if you're an American, you're living on stolen land. Almost certainly you're living on stolen land, and nothing's ever going to reverse that completely, right? I don't have any myth about Manhattan being sold back, but a lot greater justice could be done to the Native Americans who are still here. A lot greater justice could be done to them. Not reparations. There is no such thing as blood guilt. You cannot pay someone for the harms that your ancestors 50 generations ago did to their ancestors 50 generations ago. You can, but you're foolish to do so. There's no such thing as blood guilt. But there's a lot more that could be done. A lot more that could be done in the United States. And the first step in that is for people to read that pantheon of great Native American injustice books. Custer Died for Your Sin, Bury My Heart at Wounded Knee, The New Trail of Tears, and also Disinherited by the unapologetically white Dale Van Avery. You still want to read it. It's beautifully written. But this is also, I didn't mean to I digressed away from the book we're actually talking about. This is also really good, but it's Dale Van Avery writing in a very easy register. These frontier adventure stories were a very easy register. They just did well at the time. That's all. Okay, then we're going to finish up with, I'm going to try not to lecture again. We'll finish up. This book is by Charles Siebert, and it is called The Wauchula Woods Accord, toward a new understanding of animals. Which is the subtitle, as usual, is a little bit of a misnomer because this isn't really all about animals, all animals. It's about chimps. The author goes to a sanctuary for retired entertainment industry chimps. So chimps live as long as humans do, and they're as aware of themselves as humans are, and they know perfectly well when they have been given a raw deal, just like humans do. They have a deep sense of injustice, and also harmful conditions can drive them nuts, just like with humans. It's just they can't say it. They can't say it. They can't say it in English. They can't retain a lawyer, so they can be treated any way they want. And this author went to visit these retired. It's a sanctuary. They're treated as well as I guess you can, but it's only in recompense for the fact that for 40 years they were treated poorly. I think there were a number of cheetahs at this reserve, not the African running animal, but chimps who had played the character of cheetah in various Tarzan movies. Who, they had that role when they were little, when they were children, because you can't do that when they're older. You can't even with a little kid chimp. A little kid chimp is still as strong as a full-grown human being. And many a Tarzan actor received injuries from those chimps. When they get older than that, when they get to be teenagers or in their 20s, they're 5 times as strong as a human being. They can kill you easily, and that's just too much of a risk. So they get retired. The ones who were lucky enough not to be killed get retired, and a lot of these animals were at this reserve, and this writer got to spend time with them and got to know them. And very convincingly in this book chronicles an elevation of consciousness. What does that mean? I don't think in the course of I haven't read this in 12 years, but I don't think in the course of the book he ever comes right out and says these are people. But they are. They are people. You don't have to spend much time around one, again, in a non-stressed environment, which is hard to do because all of these creatures are in cages. They're all in prison, and prison is a high-stress environment. You don't have to spend much time around them before you realize that they are people who just can't speak English. That's all. And that's what this author comes to. This author, in the course of this book, comes to the idea that we need something like the grandiose title of the book, that we need some sort of new understanding about how to deal with sentient animals who aren't human on Earth. I would extend the ambit of this to the 3 or 4 dozen sentient animals who aren't human species on Earth. And of course, the answer is obvious. We already have such legislation. It's not like the only people who benefit from protective legislation are people who can walk into a courtroom with a lawyer they've bought with their own money. That's not true at all. That has never been true. We extend legal protections to comatose patients. We extend legal protections to small infants, to little children. We extend legal protections to immigrants who don't know the language of the law courts and who can't afford a lawyer anyway. We do that all the time. You do not need to be able to show up in court to warrant legal protection. That is absolutely true of all these other animals. If you can not only suffer, but know what suffering is and want very much to avoid it, then an ethical law system should protect you. It should afford you legal rights. It should be illegal to kill a chimpanzee. It should be illegal to experiment on a chimpanzee. It should be illegal to get a little bit closer to home, and I promise I'll wrap it up rather than go on an hour-long rant, but this is my own home territory. It should be illegal in the United States to experiment on dogs. They know what's going on. They have 27,000 years of experience with human beings. They know us better than we know ourselves. Literally, they know us better than we know ourselves. They know what's happening to them. We do it anyway. We take advantage of that bond and do it anyway, and experiment on them in horrifying ways every year, over and over again. Experiment is the wrong word. Experiment happens when you're not sure of the outcome. If you're sure of the outcome, it's just torture. And yet, the U.S. military tortures beagles every year. Dozens and dozens and dozens of them every year. They're bought and raised to be tortured. Grow them to a certain size, put them in a conveyor belt of slings, run the slings to the end of a firing range, and open fire on them, with the military's declared purpose being to determine the effect of high-round artillery fire on living flesh. As if they don't know that. As if they don't have 270 years of experience at that. They know that perfectly well. They've just got beagles in the budget. And also, a large number of the people involved in beagle research or giving painful cancers to rats, or it just made the news, macaque monkeys that are given horrible diseases and then transported in the freezing cold. A large number of the people who do that are sadistic. So in addition to not having any legitimate scientific reason, they're really doing it to get off on the cruelty. And I said I wouldn't. All right, I'll wrap it up. The point is, this book is a faltering, halting attempt at an idea change along those lines. That definitely we shouldn't be doing that. That a legal system that has the ability to be kind and to be merciful has a duty to be kind and to be merciful. So it's a very thought-provoking book. I don't know why I got rid of it. It's right up my alley, but like all of these, I got rid of it. So that is the Library of the Lost for today. But I'm gonna keep going as long as we're up here, and that might be some time, especially if the aforementioned snowstorm is big enough to make travel inconvenient. The Bean and I might be snowed in. There are worse places to be snowed in. But I will wrap this up for now. I will see you soon. Thank you, BookTube.